All right, good morning, everyone. We're excited to introduce this morning's panel on expanding energy justice in under-electrified regions around the globe and at home. Our moderator for this morning it will be Professor Bruce Usher. He is the faculty director of the Tamer Center for Social Enterprise at the Columbia Business School. Prior to Columbia, Professor Usher was the CEO of EcoSecurities Group, which developed greenhouse gas emission reduction projects in developing countries. So without further ado, Professor Bruce Usher.
Thank you, Nick, and welcome everyone to this panel. I am joined by four panelists this morning. We have Suzanne Singer from Native Renewables, John Saunders from Sun Culture, Assad Razouk from Syndicatum Energy, and Joao Cunha from the African Development Bank. So please join me virtually in welcoming all four of our panelists here this morning. And we are going to obviously discuss broadening energy access and energy justice. And I want to start with a question for all four panelists, and perhaps we can just start off by going in the order you were introduced. Discuss the barriers to expanding energy access in the parts of the world where you're working. So what are the barriers that you're seeing in your area? And a moment or two on solutions. How can we overcome some of those barriers? So Suzanne, perhaps you could start us off.
Good morning, thank you. I'm the director of Native Renewables, and what areas we mostly work in is with indigenous communities, specifically focused in the Navajo Nation, which is in Arizona, New Mexico, and Utah, and then also the Hopi Nation, which lies within the Navajo Nation. And so for those of you that don't know, there's approximately 15,000 families who don't have energy access in the Navajo Nation, and best guess is probably another 1,000 more within the Hopi Nation. So some of the challenges we have, one of the major ones is working in low-income communities or low-income families. So the cost to getting, for example, off-grid residential solar systems is incredibly high for some families, especially the capital cost and paying that up front. Batteries for most families are pretty expensive, so I think one of the solutions for that is to try to think of more creative financing options so that they can pay over time. Some of the other big challenges we come across is just infrastructure challenges. Without energy access also comes difficult to have water, difficult to have internet access. So things like that might be simple and you're just kind of used to doing maintenance over the internet, that's kind of impossible. Sometimes connecting with people and families, we have to like hike to the nearest hill just to get cell phone reception sometimes if we're lucky. So that can be tough. The other thing I didn't mention was a lot of these families are not connected to any grid utility. So getting grid extension can be very expensive, and for a lot of families it's not even an option. And then the last one I'll mention, of course, we're all dealing with this past year is COVID has made it incredibly challenging to do work. I can talk about it more later, but things like the supply chain has been an issue, working safely within communities has been an issue, and, you know, just trying to take care of ourselves and, you know, mentally and be able to continue to do the work even though family members have been heavily impacted. But I'll leave it there. Thanks.
It's a long list of challenges, particularly in the past year. Thanks, Suzanne, for opening up with that. I think Texas highlighted for us that when you don't have electricity, you also don't have things like water and other related challenges. These things are interconnected. John, maybe talk a little bit about the challenges you're seeing in sub-Saharan Africa related to energy access broadly. I know your Sun Culture is a specific sort of subsector focus, but tell us what you're seeing.
Yeah, and just maybe real quick for background, you know, Sun Culture, what we do is we design, manufacture, finance, and service IoT-enabled solar energy systems and irrigation equipment, mainly focused on smallholder farmers. Our main markets are Kenya, but then we have distribution in Uganda, Ethiopia, Togo, Ivory Coast, to name a couple other countries. Where we see, I guess, the biggest challenge really leads down to affordability, as Susan alluded to. It's by far the biggest barrier that we face, and there's a couple of different strategies that we've undertaken to try to overcome that barrier. I think first and foremost, we have our own asset financing platform where we're doing lending off of our own balance sheet. So that makes that affordability to our customers a lot more palatable upfront. I think too, we've started working with local governments on smart subsidy programs. So we actually just finished a results-based financing program that definitely subsidized some of our upfront costs. And I think three, the biggest one is smart regulation. We're very fortunate to be backed by like one of our largest investors is EDF, the large French utility, who has a lot of connections with a lot of different governments across the continent. And I think the statistic that jumps out the most in terms of like the smart government regulation piece is that for us, if they were to lower or take away VAT and duties that we're paying for our systems, our prices would drop by roughly 26%, and our total addressable market would increase by about 150%. And so I think it's really a combination of strategies that we can focus in-house. And so, like I said, our asset financing platform, in addition to subsidy programs, and then I think overall smart government regulation would help circumvent some of these challenges that we face. Thanks.
Thanks, John. That's a great intro. And I think from this part of the world, when we talk about regulation, I think we're often thinking about government subsidies. And actually, what you're pointing out is some of the regulations. It's not a question of subsidies. It's just removing barriers, right? Regulatory barriers like VAT taxes that can be challenging. Saad, over to Southeast Asia, where your business is across the region. What are the challenges you're seeing in the region without overgeneralizing? Because of course, every country is unique in that sense. But what are the barriers you're seeing and some of the solutions?
Yeah, hi Bruce, and good evening from Singapore. Look, I'd like to take a step back instead of answering the question directly. Let's just put it in context. We've had since the 1880s a run of fossil fuel power of 140 years minimum. That fossil fuel power has failed to reach globally approximately 1 billion people, of which several hundred million are in Southeast Asia, and most of the others are in sub-Saharan Africa. The record of energy access is one of failure. And this is in context in a world where the renewable energy industry is able not only to deliver 100% of the electrons everybody needs, but probably 200% or 300%, which will lead to the development of whole new industries that you and I haven't even thought about. Because when the electrons are plentiful and cheap, that's what's going to happen. And therefore, the barriers to energy access, I'm afraid to say, are vested interests, corruption, and obfuscation. You pick which one you prefer, but broadly speaking, that's what the barriers are, and they exist in every single country. And we, the people trying to actually do something about it, are to this date, but I think it's going to change very soon, outgunned and outspent in terms of lobbying dollars or dongs or Philippine pesos, or you pick your currency. But we are winning in terms of where we're going because we're clearly cheaper and better and can produce multiples of what the fossil fuel industry has produced. As I said, we can probably produce 5 times the energy the global world needs in no time. But for now, it's not just yet happened. And I think task number 1 is to destroy what's standing in the way when you're already the cheapest.
Yeah. And so thanks for that perspective, which I completely agree with. And when I first got in this industry nearly 20 years ago, and we first connected over a decade ago, it was tougher in the sense that the products were more expensive. Right? We had to have subsidies to compete. And to your point today, the products are now competitive, or in many cases, the cheapest product, the best product out there. You said, I think things are changing. And I would agree with you. But why do you think they're changing? I just want to dig into that since you made that comment, and then let's hear from Joao next.
Very simple. I'll give you a case study. Just look at Vietnam. So Vietnam had zero renewable energy to speak of in 2019. That's only 2 years ago. Today, they have over 15 gigawatts of installed solar and wind. So to recast your question, what happened, right? Why did they wake up and smell the coffee, to use one of my favorite New York sentences? And the reason is they realized that if they were going to industrialize and compete with China and Thailand, their neighbors and competitors, and deliver what they wanted for their own people, they just simply could no longer wait for coal or gas or LNG or LPG or even nuclear to deliver any solutions in the lifetime of the leaders of the country, when the obvious solution was there and it was cheaper and achievable. Therefore, you must have top-down leadership. It's not going to get done without that.
Yeah, leadership, and you pointed out a very important point here, which is that fossil fuel plants take 3 to 5 years to construct and build, maybe 10 years. In some regions of the country, the world, 10 years. You can build a solar plant in 6 months, right? It's extraordinary, that speed advantage in addition to the cost advantage. Joao, you're saying you have perhaps a bigger picture perspective in the African Development Bank, and from the DFI perspective. What are the barriers the DFIs are seeing? What are the solutions you're looking at?
Thank you very much, and it is a pleasure to be here. This is a really broad question, and I think I could spend hours.
Joao, if I can just interrupt, it's a little hard to hear you. I don't know if it's
okay.
Yeah, just speak close to the microphone. Let's try that.
Try to hold this closer. Is that better?
That's a bit better. Yes,
okay,
thank you.
Okay, very good.
Yeah, we're having a little tech challenges here.
No
Thank
problem.
you.
No problem. No, it's a pleasure to be here, and I was just saying this is a very big question, and I could spend hours on it. I'll try to also take a little bit of a step back. So, yes, Africa is where the bulk of the underserved or unconnected population lives. We're talking about more than 50% of the continent's population, about 550 million people in total. And a lot of these people are in rural areas. So, we're talking about large countries, very dispersed populations, communities very poor in different parts of the territories. And historically, we as African Development Bank have been trying to solve this issue through a large infrastructure. So that's been the paradigm, I would say, until not too long ago, probably 5 or so years ago. I think the paradigm has been like large infrastructure, big hydropower plants, big transmission and distribution networks. But the reality is that progress is very slow, and this model has some inherent flaws, right? So the utilities usually have a monopoly on delivering connections, on providing power. A lot of the times they're poorly run. They have management issues. They're not recovering costs. They're exposed to political influence. And along the way that they just are not able to sort of provide the connections and really deliver power to the industries and obviously household power. So it wasn't until I would say, well, and John and Assad, I know these very well. It wasn't until 5, maybe a little bit more than that, years ago, when the whole decentralized renewable energy movement sort of appeared on the back of very cheap or deep declining solar technologies. It came on the back of the mobile penetration, mobile revolution, and introduction of digital payments. And all of a sudden, you're able to provide very affordable, modular, small kits to rural populations. And around that, you start seeing a lot of innovation. The small kits become larger kits. Then it's not just about lights and charging. Then you start selling appliances and other types of productive use applications. So we've seen a lot of innovation over the last years. What is the challenge? What are the challenges? Is that we still don't have scale. And if we want to see the same level of investments that we're seeing in utility scale projects on the large power plants, we also need to see some scale in the small decentralized energy businesses. And this is the sort of the problem we're trying to solve: how to aggregate, how to make projects a bit bigger, how to de-risk them. And this is what John was talking about, certain policy and regulatory frameworks, tax exemptions are not there. They need to be there. These projects need to generate more revenue. There's also the issue of financing, and a lot of these projects, decentralized energy projects, they are collecting revenues in local currency while they're being funded in hard currency. This is a major risk for these businesses, and we need to find more local currency financing solutions, which are not hard to find, nor easy to find in the market. And obviously, there's the issue of subsidies. A lot of people believe that these are private sector businesses. Why should they ask for subsidies? But the reality is that you have subsidies embedded all across the infrastructure, big infrastructure sectors. So it's an issue of justice. If that's the topic here, I think there has to be justice when you allocate subsidies, and there has to be subsidy parity. And one of the best ways to deliver impact and bang for the buck is to also persuade governments to assign or allocate some of their subsidies in the energy sector, God forbid if they're in the fossil fuels, and put them into energy access businesses, be it for solar kits, be it for mini grids, be it for clean cooking, be it for solar pumping, like some culture. So I'll stop it there. Thank you.
Okay, but Joel, let me just dig into one of the comments you made. You said one of the big challenges is lack of scale. And what is the barrier to scale? Because it's not technology. We have 1,000 megawatt wind farms. Even here in the U.S., they'll soon be building 1,000 megawatt solar farms quite soon. Barrier to scale in the region that you see.
Yeah, well, maybe John and Assad can also weigh in on this because they're right on the front lines. But obviously, from our perspective and from a sort of a commercial financier perspective, more generally, you're not going to do $1 million tickets. You want to do $10 million, $20 million, $50 million, and you want to be assured that you'll see some return, which is commensurate with the risk that you're taking. And it's I would say that one part is that there's not enough aggregation, so you may need platforms that aggregate more projects. And some of these businesses are growing, and they're really becoming multi-country platforms, especially in the CNI space. And I'm sure Assad can speak to that, but certainly in the sort of the rural sort of a solution space. I think that's one of the issues, is aggregating, whether it's in platforms or country portfolios. I would say that the other issue is again an issue of risk. I think if you're able to solve some fundamental challenges and create, really prove that the business model underlying these energy access businesses is sound, I think you'll certainly see more capital flowing, and you should see that scale up coming more naturally. So I would say it's probably around these two sort of aspects, but certainly Assad and John can provide a more granular perspective, because I'm sure they're struggling to fundraise and dealing with various investors, and they're not making their lives easy.
I don't know. I think they're both hitting it out of the park, so I'm not too sure. But no, but on the scale issue, because in the U.S. we did have the scale issue initially, right? Small projects, small capital, people don't want to invest. There's a chicken and egg problem there with the scaling. But Assad and John, your thoughts first on the scale issue. I want to dig into that a little bit, and then I'm going to change topics, and I want to go back to Suzanne with a different topic.
Yeah, no, I mean, the scaling issue is obviously
John, I think you're
challenging.
muted. There you go. Yeah.
Oh, can you hear me now? Okay. Yeah, I think the scaling issue definitely is a challenge. A major challenge we face, and I think the big thing I can speak from Sun Culture's perspective is that really to have that product market fit and kind of figure out all the tangential things I need to figure out to get the business to a spot where you can scale and attract commercial investment is incredibly challenging. And so I think like Sun Culture, for example, very proud that we've closed our $25 million Series A recently. We've had some funding from the African Development Bank through the Facility of Energy Inclusion, off-grid energy access. Gosh, it's long as said, but we were the first first funder, first company to receive funds through that, managed by the Lions Head team. And so, but this is probably 3-4 years of us, working to figure it out. In our markets, the bit that is particularly challenging is that there aren't a lot of other companies that are complementary to what we're trying to do. And so you have to be very vertically integrated in order to achieve any type of potential success. And so for Sun Culture, for example, not only are we doing the product design and the manufacturing with our partners in China, but we're also doing the selling, we're doing the financing, we have the retail, we have the after sales, we have the installation piece. And this is all internally. Like on a day-to-day basis, I'm literally running maybe 7 different businesses, and that's before I even start talking about what we do internationally outside of Kenya, where it's projects with NGOs, or it's B2B partnerships with other off-grid companies that want to sell solar-powered water pumps. And so I think the challenge to scale is definitely that that financing piece is a huge part of it. But I'd say structurally, the way the broader industry is set up, and for us in particular, the need to be almost fully vertically integrated before we can actually attract that commercial capital is incredibly challenging to do. And again, I've been with Sun Culture almost 5 years now. We've just closed our Series A, and again, $25 million. We're very excited about where we're able to take this from here. But there was a lot of days and months before that when it was a very different picture. But yeah, those would be my perspectives.
That's very helpful, John. We've talked about it over the years, and having to scale both vertically and horizontally, double challenge. Absolutely. Asad, what are your thoughts on the scale issue that the industry's faced in the past? Are you still seeing that, or do you think we're past that in your region?
Well, I think we're past that globally, to be honest. That doesn't mean we're past that in every single country, but by and large, something like 43% of all new power capacity in the United States in 2020 was solar, just solar, right? I mean, that's a tremendously incredible number if you flash back just 2 years. The problem, I mean, to me, looking at it on a daily basis, because Joao, that's kind of one of my daily challenges. It's not this. The issue is the math. When investors figure out that they've been doing the math wrong, the scale problem goes away. And they figure out that they're doing the math wrong when they increase the discount rate for fossil fuels and decrease the discount rate for renewable energy. That struggle has been at least 10 years old, because basically the issue with scale is somebody tells you, oh, my minimum ticket is 200 million or 500 million, pension funds typically. And you say, okay, I have 200 million or 500 million of investments, across several markets, countries, states, or whatever. But then they are comparing it with their alternatives, particularly in energy, and they're applying the wrong discount rates. We can confidently say that they have figured out that their math were wrong, and therefore they're now looking at the numbers correctly. It may not have trickled down to the most developing countries in the world, but having said that, it's trickled down to China, it's trickled down to India, it's trickled down to Vietnam, and it's trickled down elsewhere. And so I'm optimistic. To me, number one barrier, to be blunt, is corruption. That's the corruption of fossil fuels and a system built over 150 years. It's not really anything else, because whenever you kind of press that button, that's what the bottom line is.
So let's, those are all good insights. Let's switch topic a little bit and go a little deeper on sort of the political barriers and the economics around it. Just before we do that though, I just want to mention that we're going to take questions around 11:30, so about 15 minutes. Love to get an audience. We have a large audience. And if you could put questions into the chat box starting just around 11:30, just before 11:30, that would be terrific. Looking forward to that. So what I want now to talk about are jobs, and the reason I bring this up is many politicians and many of the supposed barrier to transitioning to renewables and energy access is around jobs that'll be lost in the fossil fuel industry. Are jobs gained in renewables? And Suzanne, maybe you could start us off with your perspective on that sort of never-ending argument and battle, and your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so I think I might use Navajo Nation as a kind of a microcosm of what is going on. Historically, we and the Hopi Nation are a coal industry economic area. So there were several power plants in the area. There's 2 coal mines that were located in our communities. And recently, last year, the Navajo Generating Station shut down. And as we transition away from coal, there's roughly $100 million lost in wages for workers that work at both the plants and the mines. There's 850 roughly good paying jobs that go away. But on the flip side, I think looking at it holistically as well is if you're interested in decarbonization, like that's a problem that gets, so I won't say solved, but it gets improved upon. There's issues with water quality that comes in from the coal industry within the communities. So I think I would also ask that people think broadly about this instead of just jobs as well. But there are within our own communities politicians that are still very much on the coal train. And one of our enterprises actually bought a coal mine, I think either last year or the year before, which is kind of astonishing considering coal is not going to projected to be a good economic investment in the future. So viewpoints are all over the place. I think there's some politicians that are switching as they're learning more about the economics of the coal industry. But people just being really comfortable with this is what we've had all this time. This is how we get money. And unfortunately, in some cases, not being prepared for that transition. So in the case of our communities, yes, there's a huge loss to the economics, money coming in, royalties that pays for services for the community. So there is a divide, but there are some people who understand both worlds and are trying to walk that line of how do you transition people over into new job placements. Some of the owners of the power plant were able to transition some of their workers to other locations. There's other entities. So like us, for example, we're trying to work on training people in the off-grid solar industry and training them, including we want them to have the technical knowledge and background to be technicians in the future. We want career builders. So we don't want to just build laborers that come in and do a job and then they get released. So I think there's a lot of potential for changing, and it's going to happen. I think people just need to be prepared. And I think not including last year, wind and solar were some of the fastest growing job industries in the United States. And of course, everyone got hit hard by COVID last year, so there were some job losses. But I feel like for things that are outdated like coal, it's kind of a no-brainer for transition. If you're really along the line thought process of energy security, where you need to diversify your portfolio, it's a little bit harder to make that argument for things like natural gas. But again, there's people who are in the environmentalist world who are opposed to it because of some of these other side effects, thinking outside of just the energy supply. But from my world, a lot of the job areas that I need support from are installers, technicians who can do maintenance, educators. We're big believers in educating people on how to utilize their energy consumption, because we want their systems to last as long as possible. And if you drain your batteries frequently, it won't last as long as we want it to. We have to work with a lot of raw material suppliers and distributors, people that work in manufacturing. I think this year we're making a big push to try to utilize some of the trade skills that used to work at the power plants, like electricians or welders and those kind of people that can support, not doing our installs directly, but we need supporting occupations to be able to do our work effectively. And ideally, we want to bring those people in locally and have a local economic investment into what we're doing. Some other things we're supporting is transportation. We need legal support, accounting, HR, people working in policy.
It's a lot of jobs.
Yeah, so all over the place, like many other industries. So I think in terms of the argument that it's not creating jobs, I would disagree with that. I mean, maybe it's not as quickly as people want. It's a growing, especially in our world, we're building the infrastructure as we go along. So it's going to take more time. But in terms of, was there a second question to that?
No, that was it. But you said it's a no-brainer, and that's the irony that I see on this, on the economic side, is there are far more jobs in solar and wind in the U.S., just to speak to the U.S. for a minute, than there are in coal. And those coal jobs are going away. And while they're good paying jobs in the coal industry, they're not good jobs in the sense from a health and welfare perspective. Those not the easiest way to make a living. So it continues to surprise me how politicians lean on the jobs argument, which is a completely upside down argument. That's in the U.S. context. Again, I'd like to, and Suzanne, in your community, as you say, there's still challenges in making that switch because there still are a lot of coal jobs. Let's move back again overseas. And Joao, maybe you could, from your perspective in the African Development Bank, how do you see that argument around jobs and economic growth? When I say jobs, really, we're talking about economic growth or economic opportunity, and that argument of, if you don't have fossil fuels, you don't have jobs and economic growth.
Sure. Well, I think in Africa, except for a few countries, and I'll list them, there isn't a big entrenched fossil fuel industry. A lot of the countries, or most of the countries, are oil importers. They're paying a lot of money for importing oil and gas, and this has an impact on the balance of payments for the country. It has an impact on how much actually the country can consume, the population can consume. You do have notable exceptions. Nigeria, certainly, it's a country that lives off oil revenues, and it's got a very entrenched sort of oil industry. And if you see the amount of diesel generation capacity that is pervasive across the entire country, you'll see how much oil sort of represents, and how much that also probably translates into jobs along the value chain. You have South Africa, which has massive coal reserves, and a lot of coal power generation, and it's certainly politically very sensitive issue. And then in East Africa, you have Tanzania and Mozambique. You have large gas reserves, which also cloud a little bit the way that the decision makers approach the sector. But I would say that by and large, most countries are importing. They're importing at high prices, and at the end of the day, the math is to pick up on Assad's earlier comment. The math is, I think, strongly in favor of, for example, solar technologies and decentralized technologies, which can actually, compress tariffs, compress unit costs for local populations, and deliver other benefits as well in terms of health, in terms of stimulation of economic activity. So I would say, just overall, and again, not that we have any hard numbers or hard studies, but clearly we're seeing a lot of economic activity and job creation being stimulated by small-scale renewable energy technologies, and we're seeing that these benefits also disproportionately a disproportionate amount of women as well, which is a group that has been historically disfavored by also by the fossil fuel industry. So all things considered, we see a positive trend, and we see that the renewable energy is really a game changer, whether you look at it at large scale or small scale. It's really sort of rolling out, and has very strong underlying economic fundamentals behind it, including in terms of job creation.
Okay, so heading in the right direction. Are you seeing this argument still happening in Southeast Asia around the jobs and economic growth debate, or are we beyond that now?
We're definitely not beyond that, because I think it's very emotive. So it's not actually very rational, right? So if you've been in the coal industry, typically you've been in the coal industry for generations, and it's emotive. I think we have to recognize that it's emotive, and we have to do something about it on an emotive wavelength. And one of the best case studies is Germany. So what Germany did is it said we're going to phase out coal, but it did it in a compassionate way by promising to retrain, replace, and also provide money to people that thought, rightly or wrongly, it doesn't matter. And yes, the renewable energy creates 7 times more jobs, and all that. But people have an emotional attachment to industries that have been around for over 100 years. And I think, to go back to one of my earlier comments, the top-down approach must take into account the cultural war, so to speak. You can't just ignore it because you want to do the right thing by the math, notwithstanding how much I believe in math, Joel. So I think that the coal employment, but also the oil and gas employment, because that's around the corner, the people working in refineries, in oil and gas exploration, in just simple, in a gas station. We're going to have to do something with all these people. It's not just, and Asia is addressing it, I think, in some ways by electrifying while not forgetting, in most countries, the emotive aspect. Because I do think you have to take people's feelings into account. So, as an example, the oil and gas offshore industry can transition to offshore wind in a relatively straightforward manner, but you have to help people help themselves. You can't just put job offers in the New York Times and hope they're all going to sign up. You have to actually go to them and retrain them, which is a plus, by the way, because they're actually incredibly suitable to offshore wind, and then do it that way.
Yeah, the emotive element, otherwise it would be a no-brainer, as Suzanne put it, right? But you complicate it with the history and the emotion. So I want to, I'm still in the cloud. We have a couple minutes, and I'm starting to see some good questions here in the chat. Sorry, Bruce, John, go ahead.
Bruce, I just want to make a quick note on the jobs front, because I think there's one piece that we did miss in that discussion. So I think from like Sun Culture's perspective, we've obviously added a lot of jobs over the years, and we have an agent network of 500 sales agents in the field. We have 150 full-time employees. You see a lot of upward mobility within our organization. We try really hard to hire from within, but that's only talking about half of like the impact that I think our company is able to have. I think the other half is job or kind of income generation from the assets that we're actually financing to our end users. And so I pulled some stats, but right now from Sun Culture's perspective, we see that roughly 87% of the farmers that reported an increase in production, and 81% of those did that without an increase, without planting additional land. So obviously making, solar irrigation makes farming a lot more productive. 80% of our farmers report an increase in money earned. And so that's obviously from the harvest and also a decrease in costs. And then farmers also reported through the survey that we did that on average, they saw a 44% increase in revenue each season that they were farming with Sun Culture's assets. And so, yes, we're obviously creating jobs internally, but also I think the end users, our customers are also, highly benefiting from this type of, income generating technology that we're selling. So just wanted to make sure I got that point in real quick.
No, you jumped ahead of me with the question. I was going to ask about the question of using renewables as an economic asset, because a lot of people are using renewables for lighting and energy access for lighting and devices, as opposed to an economic asset as Sun Culture does. But you answered the question before I asked it, so that's all right. But let me ask one last question, and then I want to take audience questions. And this question's more actually for John and Assad, but anybody has feedback, which is about jobs, but about jobs for graduates of Columbia University. and any advice you would have, very, very briefly, as a sentence or two, advice to graduates here who are interested in working on broadening energy access, who are interested in following your lead and the work that all four of you are doing. What advice would you give them about entering the sector now, which is somewhat different from when you entered actually some years ago? John, any thoughts on that career path?
I'll try to keep it concise. I think the biggest thing for me as it relates to Columbia is that I think there's a lot of resources there that people might not be fully aware of. So Bruce, I know you and I have definitely worked together on a bunch of stuff over the years. I think Sandra Navali at the CBS's Social Enterprise Office or Tamer Center is excellent in that staff. And for me, not only during my time as a student was I able to work on projects, develop relationships with professors like yourself, and also kind of expand my network through alums. It was super helpful during school, but I also say that carried on after graduation. And to this day, obviously, I'm a part of this fantastic panel. But being part of your social ventures class and speaking there, I think it's just like a very broad network that Columbia University has, and kind of underlying resources that I think with a little bit of effort, people can really uncover. So I'd highly recommend that. And I'm always open to speak with current or alums of Columbia University as it relates to what I do. So by all means, feel free to reach out to me as a resource.
That's great. Thanks, John. Great advice. Assad, any thoughts? You answered this some time ago. I guess is the way to put it. It's a different time. We're about the same age. It's a lot has changed. But any career advice?
Well, I'll tell you one thing that's changed, Bruce. Yes. Today, we are at the cusp of, we're in the middle, really, of the fastest, deepest, probably most profound disruption of the energy sector in 200 years, right? So I think as a Columbia graduate, what you need to do is, there's many other interesting sectors, obviously, that people can go to. But as far as this one is concerned, this one is on the brink of fundamental change, which means with the advent of the overabundant electron, the creation of business model we probably haven't even thought about. In the same way that, say, 4G is what allows you, which nobody had thought about 10 years ago, but is today a massively valuable industry, or whatever we're using now, Hopen.com or Zoom. In the same way, the overabundance of energy, which is absolutely what we're going to, is going to create tremendously exciting business models for business graduates. I mean, it's so bad that I kind of want to go back to business school.
Yeah. Yeah, we would take you back. I said, we'll take you back. Well, I mean, I actually, another very successful graduate of the business school said to me recently, he said, think about the technology revolution of 25 years ago, essentially the internet, and how it has changed the entire economy dramatically. And the the changes that we see as resulting from climate change, but specifically renewable energy, are going to change the economy almost to the same extent. So what's happened in the last 25 years in technology may be what's going to happen in the next 25 years, but related to energy.
Without the maybe. Without the maybe.
Yeah, without the maybe. You're right. I will remove the maybe from my comments. Please strike that. Great comments. Terrific. So we got some good questions here in the chat box. Let's move over to audience questions here. And Ellen Morse asking a question for Suzanne. I don't know if the panelists can see the chat box or not, but I'll just repeat it here for everyone. So Suzanne, Ellen's asking about training and education on the Navajo Nation, particularly for those who've lost their jobs at the coal-fired plant. Is there interest in taking up these studies? What's been effective on
that? Yeah, so I guess quickly before I answer that question, I also the jobs thing is I'm glad John brought it up, because some of the folks that we work with and provide power for, they have their own small businesses. They operate out of their homes. So working in the evening hours with reliable light is really important to them. You have like sewers, jewelry makers. So it also supports that economic industry and even education too. So having power to be able to buy satellite infrastructure allows people to be able to do that. So back to the question, and I think what we found is some of the most effective ways to integrate training is doing it in the communities where the people are based out of or more heavily impacted. It's harder to do, but it's so worth the investment. So to give you an idea, about in 2019, we had a 7-week-long training in one of the community centers, and we invited 10 people out to do everything from very basic solar energy to starting to get into hands-on activities. And so I think at least 7 of them went to do something in solar afterwards, and we still work with a few of them, which is really exciting. So one of the challenges that we, I guess, are also working under is trying to bring funds back into the community, because a lot of times we have what's called border towns where money comes in and it all filters back out outside of the nation. So we try as much as we can to host things in the community, make it closer for people to travel to, especially people who have families. Hands-on is a huge component, and we had a lot planned last year. Of course, all of those plans got thwarted. So now we're trying to adapt to some virtual online training, which is, you know, it works for now. It's not ideal because a lot of people, again, don't have internet. We have to probably move people to hotels or something just to get them training if we want to make it equitable and accessible for everybody. But from the things that we've seen is a lot of the folks, yes, they want to learn a new trade. The folks that we work with, they're super excited. And one of the biggest themes we know is people want to work close to home, because a lot of folks are kind of in construction trades and they travel all over the country. And of course they have families back home. So I think that's one of the big motivators for supporting economic investment within our own areas or communities.
Yeah, it's a good plus to bring people back home and be able to work locally. Absolutely. There's a question here about the fear of change. We talked about, so I brought up the topic of corruption. We talked about political barriers, and is there a fear of moving away from fossil fuels that you've seen out there? And if so, how do we overcome that? And let's just open that to Joao, John, Assad, Suzanne. Anybody wants to speak to that particular question?
Just a quick.
Any thoughts on that?
Thought on that.
Happy to try to take a stab at it. I think. Go ahead. Sorry.
No, go.
Oh, go ahead, Joao. You were a little slight delay there. Go ahead.
No problem. No.
And you can hold up your mic if you can. It's a little hard to hear you.
Sorry about that. Yes, I seem to be running on a delay. No, I think the issue there is one of the fear of the unknown, right? I think fossil fuels, it's what people have known forever, right? Whether it's diesel or kerosene or coal, it's what people know. And they know what they get out of it. They know how much it costs, and there's still a lot of misinformation around new technologies. They're expensive. that they may, also pollute the environment. They may create certain problems and displace people. So those issues that also play out, I guess, to some extent on other infrastructure projects. But there is some misconceptions that tend to push people away from embracing change, and we see that there is a need for also working on the awareness and the sensitization side, and certainly sort of this is one part of the work that we do, is try really to explain to policymakers, but also explain to communities, explain to the people at large, that there is a real tangible benefit that goes beyond the financial benefit of transitioning into newer, cleaner, more sustainable technologies. But it's not so
Yeah.
straightforward. It's not a given. For us, it's a given. We take it for granted, but a lot of people will struggle making that mind shift.
Yeah. Technology change can be scary. I mean, people react to that. John, you were about to say as well?
Yeah, just real quick to complement that, I think on our end, the key really is that demonstration piece with potential customers. A lot of our potential customers have never seen a solar powered water pump. A lot of them are using, Professor Usher, you can attest to this having seen it. Using manual kind of pulley systems to for irrigation purposes, so on and so forth. And so when we do an installation, we make sure that not only are we training the customer who's getting the unit installed, but a lot of times it'll generate a lot of interest. We'll train kind of that surrounding community or educate them on that. We're actually in the process of rolling out a fantastic project that's funded by the World Bank. But what they're doing is they provided funding for the county governments in Kenya to purchase units from us, so we can go about and install demo farms in some of our key areas. And so to date, since the program started, roughly 450 demo farms across these different counties, and these are places not only where we can send potential customers to meet an agent to see a demo, but also the person who's managing the farm themselves obviously benefits from it, and that kind of ripple effect that will have in that local community. And then I'd say lastly, we make sure that at each of our sales and service centers, it's not just stocked with products, but also at least that we all have a demo farm adjacent to that sales and service center where people can see it. Because again, the leap that they're going from is a lot of our customers having a pulley system to a very advanced piece of technology that we've installed. But it's all about that training and getting that people to adopt is the key.
Yeah, it's an interesting point, John. I remember visiting Sun Culture in Kenya 2 years ago, and you guys have stores really just to show off the product. People don't, we don't have solar stores here. Nobody goes to a solar store to look at solar panels and pumps. People just buy it. But it was really impressive how your stores kind of show it off, and so the community is very comfortable with the technology before getting it. There's another question here I want to get thoughts on from the panel around community owned renewable energy projects or community projects. I think as many people know, community solar has become very popular here in the US. A lot of states have support for it, and it's really taken off in a big way. In the areas where you're operating, do you have any examples of community owned microgrids or community solar of any form? Anyone want to speak to that? Assad, I don't know if you're seeing any community-owned solar in your region.
There are some, but it's somewhat linked to the previous question, but in a kind of a counterintuitive way. This 80,000 demonstrations in China minimum per year against coal. Indonesia, Vietnam, and elsewhere, people are seriously, the fear is really not so much from the technology switch, but from that coal plant in your backyard. And so similarly, at the moment, community solar, which, as you said, is a big thing in the US, is actually having a hard time taking off in most Asian countries. You see it in India a little bit, you see it in the Philippines a little bit, You see it in Myanmar a little bit, but it's mostly driven by NGOs rather than people. And the reason it's not driven by people is because the people are still pissed off about that coal plant that somebody threatening to build nearby and haven't really coalesced around it. So I'd say the US is maybe 5 years ahead of my region.
Okay. Okay. Interesting. We just had another minute or two, but maybe just other panelists. Susanna, is there any community solar community energy projects in the Navajo Nation or in your area?
So there's commercial scale projects. I'm not sure it exactly classifies as a community solar project, but there are new companies that are B Corp formations that are working on trying to create benefits back into the community. Some other tribal nations I could think of, so Blue Lake Rancheria is based in California, and I would say they're one of the leaders in new projects. They have microgrid efforts that they're working on. There's a new solar project that is in the Dakotas, and that came out of sort of the Dakota Access Pipeline. I mean, several years later, a few years later after that. But it's one of the projects, and I think that's a community solar project. It could be wrong. But there are, I think now as different community centers are getting more knowledgeable about community solar, they're definitely more interested. I think in terms of the work we do, we're in such a rural area, it's harder to implement microgrid and community solar projects. But I think it's exciting. People are learning more and trying to solve more issues with renewable energy.
With that model, yeah. So last comment, John or Joao, in sub-Saharan Africa, are there any? I know there's microgrids certainly, but any community sort of owned models as a way of broadening energy access? Maybe Joao first.
Just one some elements from Kenya. So Kenya is seen as one of the most progressive countries when it comes to promotion of renewable energy. But this is also a country where you've seen some of the biggest backlashes of communities against renewable energy projects. You've seen that, for example, in Lake Turkana, this largest wind farm in the continent. You've seen that in another wind farm, Kinangop, that effectively the project never materialized. The turbines are like just abandoned, and it's been a major sort of a loss for the investors. You've seen that in some geothermal sites. So it's not automatic that it's renewable, it's clean, people will buy into it. Sometimes you actually see the opposite. We are supporting a project in Kenya, in Mount Kenya, small hydro, where we're supporting a financial structure where the community, surrounding community, owns parts of the shares and receives part of the proceeds from this hydropower. So rather than them being, passive receivers of the project, maybe they won't even see the power coming out of that project. They're actually receiving or sharing the profits of this profit. Hopefully they'll also get a power and other benefits. But that's one example of where we're exploring hybrid structures on more sort of traditional sort of small utility scale projects. But certainly in the mini grids, we expect to see a lot of these kinds of setups rolling out in coming years.
Yeah. Terrific. Thanks, Joao. Last thoughts, John, anything you're seeing around community ownership or community involvement in this project?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's Joao definitely covered. I think the mini grid, Kenya and Tanzania, Rwanda, so on and so forth, we're seeing more and more of that. In Ethiopia, particularly, we're in discussions with the ATA, the Agricultural Transformation Advisory Board, on how maybe we can integrate solar water pumping into those mini grids as a potential kind of accessory. I think in terms of as it relates to our solution, obviously we're kind of more directly working with those individual customers, although we do see opportunities working with kind of larger communities where the community will finance a couple of the assets, but that's not our bread and butter in terms of our business, but stuff that we do explore.
So you're seeing some opportunities there. Terrific. Unfortunately, we're past time here, and we're gonna get shut down momentarily. So I haven't gotten to too many of the questions that you had. Great questions, and thanks to everybody putting questions in the chat. Most importantly, thanks to the panelists, Suzanne, Joao, John, Assad. Real pleasure to see you today on Zoom. Hopefully next time we could maybe do it in person, get some people together. But thank you very, very much. Really appreciate your involvement today. Best wishes in your work. Look forward to
All
seeing
the
you
best.
very soon.
Thank you.
Be well.
Thank
Stay safe.
you.